Hello, welcome to Bookworms. I'm Alex,
And I'm Joe.
and this is the podcast where we get together and we talk about books that we have read recently,
Books that we enjoy.
books that we love,
Books that we just can't get enough of.
books that we want to take to a nice dinner and then treat respectfully, call them, and then send an occasional romantic text saying, I'm glad I met you.
You mean ghost it like you usually do?
Yeah, and then they stop responding because they're meanies.
So this week, or this month, I should say, we are talking about The Coldest Girl in Coldtown. This was my pick.
Yeah, and what a pick it was. Why did you pick this book?
Well, Holly Black is easily my favorite YA author. Pretty much the only one I will read consistently. And this has got to be one of my favorite vampire books of all time, also. I put it up there with Dracula and Interview.
That's high praise.
It is, it is.
Yeah, it's not like you have a shortage of vampire books out there, especially in teen fiction. Reading this one, it really did stand out against a lot of that schlock that's out there.
Yeah, it's definitely got a different tune than what most of them have that I've noticed these days. Not that I read a lot of those books, but I said I read this one, and it was shortly after I had read Holly Black's Modern Fairy Tale trilogy, and I was hooked from the beginning.
Yeah, the only other book I read by her was Doll Bones. I couldn't really tell you what it was about. It's been so long. I do remember enjoying it. It's clearly stuck in my head, even though I haven't glanced at a copy of that book in a while, and I still remember having read it. She also did the Spiderwick Chronicles with Tony DiDolisi, which is a fantastic series.
She's done a lot of books actually, and had a lot of success. She is currently working on a series for another fairy tale retelling that has been quite entertaining, I think. Not as good as this book, but still pretty up there.
Nice. Before we get into it, you mentioned this is a vampire story, and there's a lot of teen fiction that's centered around vampires. Just in general, what do you think is the fascination with vampires with young people these days?
Well, it's kind of the glamorous monster, the forever young. It's the drinking of blood, which is kind of like drinking a red wine. It's the nightlife, the sexuality of everything. Just everyone loves a good vampire.
Yeah, I agree. Vampires have been around for
Ever.
yeah, for a long, long time. Dracula is generally considered the first popular vampire story.
The first one to really make it into literature.
Yeah, and it's just vampires. They're sexy. They're young. They're immortal. They're gonna live forever. They get to sit around and party all night and have very few consequences. And there's just that sensual being close to somebody. And I can see as a younger person how there would be appeal to that.
Okay, well, let's get into the book. We'll start with what the book it's about on the back of the cover here. Coldtown was dangerous. Tana knew. The glamorous cage, a prison for the damned and anyone who wanted to party with them. Tana lives in a world where walled cities called cold towns exist. In them, quarantine monsters and humans mingle in a decadently bloody mix of predator and prey. And once you pass through Coldtown's gates, you can never leave. One morning, after a perfectly ordinary party, Tana wakes up surrounded by corpses. The only other survivors of this massacre are her exasperating, endearing ex-boyfriend, infected and on the edge, and a mysterious boy burdened with a terrible secret. Shaken and determined, Tana enters a race against the clock to save the three of them the only way she knows how, by going straight to the wicked, opulent heart of Coldtown itself.
Yeah, and with that, I want to just kind of jump in right away to chapter 1.
Alex has a bone to pick here.
So the opening sentence is, well, I'll read it to you. It's Tana woke lying in a bathtub. Now, anyone
Well, hold on. Before we get into that, because even before that opening sentence, what's the first thing we see in the book? And this is basically the chapter headings for every book. there will be some morbid or spooky quote from someone else. And they had a chapter one. It's "Nothing can happen more beautiful than death" by Walt Whitman. So to kind of set the tone for what we're about to get into. So go on to your gripe about the opening sentence.
Yeah, well, I'm glad she opened with a quote from a legendary immortal poet, a beautiful musing on death, because to go back to the opening sentence here, Tana woke lying in a bathtub, which anybody who's ever taken even one creative writing class, the creative writing teacher will tell you never start a story with somebody waking up, because it is one of the most well-worn tropes in all of literature. You can think of any story, try and think of any story from the past. You've probably read it 100 times. Someone starts the story by waking up. Could you have?
This book was written a decade ago, so for many readers, that was like the beginning of time.
That's very true. Yes.
So this could have been the first one. So
No,
it wasn't
no.
a trope until Holly Black did it.
Exactly. She was the last one. She got the last one in. Now, it's not like the worst person waking up sentence ever, because it's cool. Like, why is she in the bathtub? But it could also start. We find out pretty quick she's at a party and is kind of waking up from a night of drinking and kind of just passed out in the bathtub. Could it have started with her puking her guts up in a toilet, or looking at herself in the bathroom mirror and just seeing what a hot mess she is? I mean, there's other ways to do it. I would have, if I as a writer did it, it would have been different.
Of course, Holly Black is a bestseller, and how many books have you sold, Alex?
Well, moving on. Yeah, it's the only gripe I had about the early parts of the book, because things pick up very quickly from there as she goes out back into the house from the bathroom and finds just a pile of corpses of her friends.
Yeah, we basically run into vampires almost immediately, and we're put into this world where vampires are just a reality. So I guess we'll start with talking about the vampires. We've already done a little bit. But how are the vampires in this story similar to vampires in other stories, and how are they different?
What I liked about the portrayal of the vampires in this story is that it's very duplicitous. So this is a world where vampires are heavily normalized, though people are still told to be careful around them. Yet there are bounty hunting shows about vampires. There's reality shows about vampires, hidden camera shows. Vampires are on everyone's mind all the time. And the media in this book really portrays vampires as this sexy, attractive thing that is something people might want to strive to be, because it's fun, it's free, it's amazing sensations all the time. When in reality, most vampires in this story, they live in squalor. They're constantly racked with guilt from taking lives of people so that they can preserve their own. It's a very interesting way of kind of peeling back the layers of these characters.
Yeah, I think Holly Black definitely pulled a lot from Interview with a Vampire for how the vampire structure works with makers and makeys, and just how they on the outside show living lavishly, but on the microscopic view, they're basically glorified zombies. They're just sucking off the living to eke out their existence, and they just don't have that vitality that the people that want to become vampires think that they have. They're also, when people are turned, they are still kind of themselves. It's not like in, say, the Buffy TV show, where as soon as you turn into a vampire, you're a whole new you. There's where you're just this demon, or you lose everything that you thought was you, and you can just go on killing without remorse. They play at that, saying, how can these people do that? As the ex-boyfriend Aiden keeps saying, telling Tana, he feels like his feelings and emotions are amped up to 11. But as we learn later, when people are hurt, his amped up emotions are still at 11. And that these older vampires, they can kill without remorse because, one, they're from a different time where death wasn't as big of a deal. Everyone died all around them all the time. And they've just done it for so long, they no longer care for those people that are sustaining them.
Yeah, and Aiden, especially as a character, is a great study of that because we see him from shortly after he's bitten to when he finally turns after they reach Coldtown, and we see he's becoming more and more unstable as they're driving along. He needs to drink vampire blood to stave off the cravings, but it becomes stronger and stronger, and he can't take it anymore. However, when he does finally drink human blood, he loses all control, and he kills the first person he drinks from, who's somebody who has traveled with him and trusted him. And after he does that, he almost immediately feels that hot regret that comes from taking a life.
And I mean, the good thing that, or not maybe a good thing, but the thing we also see about Aiden and Tana, why the vampires kind of like them versus other people, is they're always pushing the envelope anyways. They're not kind of wannabes. They're willing to take, they're risk takers. They're always, when Tana and Aiden were dating, they were always pushing each other further and further, trying to play chicken with each other to see who would say stop first in relationship type stuff and cheating type stuff. And the vampires find that refreshing, especially the older ones that have been around for too long, who just don't know surprise anymore.
Yeah, and I almost wish that Holly Black had maintained Aiden as a character, because after he turns, he does fade away till the very end. You see him again, but he doesn't really do much after he's changed. He sets a catalyst of events in motion with, he kills Winter, he turns Midnight, and then Tana has to kill Midnight.
He doesn't kill Winter. Midnight kills Winter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he kills someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, he turns. So he sets that catalyst in motion. He turns Midnight, who kills Winter, who then blames Tana for this whole mess, and then Tana has to kill Midnight, and that leads into going into the mansion and having to fight the old vampires.
And Aiden's the whole reason why they went to Coldtown to begin with. I think Tana would have found another way to get through her possible going cold if it wasn't for Aiden already being the way he was and needing that setting to be able to become a vampire in a safe, what she assumes is a safer place to become a vampire, where he's not going to kill everybody around. So him disappearing 2/3 of the way through kind of leaves this gaping hole in the story.
And I am kind of glad we're talking about Aiden a lot before we talk about Tana, because even though we meet Tana first, most of chapter 1 is kind of her thoughts about Aiden.
She's definitely hung up on him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, very hung up on him in the beginning. Then after he turns, she does, well, throughout the book, she begins feeling attraction towards Gabrielle, who is we find out is one of those ancient vampires.
Yeah. We also, we're going into this world not really knowing how the world went into this chaos with the vampires, and throughout the book, we get a lot of the backstory. If you want to read a chapter about the backstory, you want to do that later?
Yeah, I can read that now. That'll help us. Yeah, we'll change. Moving to a different topic. So one thing is the chapter layout. Every odd chapter is about the current plot, and every even chapter is some form of backstory or side story that's going on around the main story. So through these backstories, we learn a ton about Tana and her relationship with her family, and how vampirism has gone a long way in damaging that family unit.
Yeah, her mother went to a party, got bitten, turned cold, which means she's in the process of becoming a vampire in Holly Black's world. Once you go cold, you can become a vampire by biting a human and drinking their blood. And when Tana's mom goes cold, her dad chains her in the basement.
Yeah, as you do.
As one would do.
Right.
Feeding her like, serial killer's victim.
Yeah. That's one of the, other than chapter 1 with an entire party of young adults getting murdered, that is a very deep personal injury that Tana feels that caused by vampires. She's always been wary of them, and her dad's done everything to protect his children from them. However, Tana's younger sister adores vampires still.
Yeah, and part of Tana's problem is she's the one that her mother drank from to become a vampire, and then her father had to then take a shovel and hack off her mother's head in front of her, and then after that he became an absentee father, basically going to work and then coming home and drinking himself into a stupor every night. So a very damaged young woman. Yeah. Anyways, the chapter you want to read.
Yeah, I wanted to read chapter 8. So this is like the chapter after we learned that Tana's mother got killed by Tana's father, and that she played a hand in that death because she let the mom out of the basement. But it goes like this. Sometimes there are stories in the news about little kids who do bad things because they don't know any better, like playing with loaded guns that go off and kill brothers, or lighting matches that accidentally set fire to a whole house. It's not the kid's fault. Except that it is, really. Only no one wants to say it. Who else is there to blame? The kid is the one who disobeyed, the one who stole the keys and unlocked all the locks and almost let the bad thing out. What really happened in the basement of Tana's house wasn't like any of her happy dreams where she and her mother frolicked together. After she'd gone down the stairs, a monster had attacked her, mad with hunger, teeth gnawing with such ferocity that the vein in her arm was severed, gobbets of flesh sliding down its throat. She had shrieked and shrieked for her mother, but her mother was already there. Her mother was the monster. When Tana woke up, she found out that it was her father who'd saved her. He'd used a shovel to hack off his wife's head. Then he'd made a tourniquet from a strip of his shirt and taken his disobedient daughter to the hospital, where doctors sewed up her arm. No one said it was her fault. No one said they hated her. No one said it was because of her that her mother was dead. No one had to. So that chapter is less than a page, and it basically covers almost all the things you need to know about Tana. That she's doesn't trust vampires, that she's been injured by it, that her mother is gone, and that she is responsible, feels responsible for it. So it's very powerfully written. I wanted to read that because I thought it was the best written segment in the entire book.
Yeah, it's definitely very deep and emotional. So let's dig a little bit deeper into our protagonist. We kind of already have her backstory. I guess we'll start with her thoughts towards Aiden. Why is she and Aiden, well, why are they an ex-couple? And, what was their relationship like before the night that Aiden got bitten?
Well,
toxic?
It's like, I don't like to use the word toxic, but it was pretty toxic. There was no communication. It was purely physical. They really had no true emotional connection. It was
you almost get the sense like Aiden's almost sociopath with relationships, where he's bisexual, turns Tana bisexual, and he's just going around making out and screwing anybody that is willing, and trying to get her to call him out. And when she one-ups him on every time, at first he thinks it's a fun game until he realizes that he can't win this game and have her call him out on it and scold him, which is what he really wants.
Yeah, I think she is really with him as a form of self-punishment almost.
Yeah, and it's definitely why she's going to these parties and drinking and just kind of throwing her life away.
Also, that's what you do when you're like 19.
She's closer to 17. But anyways, now let's talk about Gabriel, maybe?
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into him.
Yeah, I mean, he is kind of a big part. The love interest, the new love interest.
Yeah, his role in the story becomes central, especially towards the end. So yeah, when we meet him, he's chained to a bed with Aiden. We don't know much about him other than that he's a vampire.
And that there's other vampires that want to hurt him, which makes Tana want to save him because she figures the enemy of my enemy must be my friend.
And the introduction of his character introduces. Look at me, I'm on fire today.
English.
Yeah. His character introduces a lot of mystery into the story, like who is this strange boy who's wasn't at the party, but he's here now, so what's going on?
And as we go along, we find out that there's a lot to him. Like, he is a bigwig in the vampire world.
Yeah, we get some big vampire lore, seemingly unrelated we learn about a ancient gatekeeper vampire called the Thorn of Istra. This vampire is in charge of hunting down fledglings and killing them so that the vampire population doesn't boom out of control and cause a shortage of food.
Yeah, because there was a vampire that had started turning a bunch of people, which is when the human world became aware of vampires. And this Thorn of Istra was supposed to kill him and kill all the other new vampires this guy had made, but he didn't, as we find out, and took pity on the guy. And the head vampire of the world, the spider, takes the Thorn of Istra and essentially tortures him for, what is it, 100 years?
Yeah, yeah. He gets tortured for a millennia, century, whatever, a long time.
100 years.
100 years. It's hinted that when we first meet Gabriel that he's being hunted by the Thorn of Istra, which is true in a more metaphorical sense.
Tana, when they make it to the Coldtown, sees a picture of Gabriel and realizes that she's been traveling with the Thorn. And instead of saying something and getting a huge reward, she keeps her mouth shut, figuring if he really wants to go in there for some reason, it must be a big deal, and she better just keep her mouth shut.
Yeah, Tana and Gabriel do form a very interesting bond on that road trip.
Just a little side note. The book takes place in western Massachusetts, which is where we're recording this right now. Holly Black is also from western Massachusetts, and they're going to the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. So it's all kind of, a cool thing, especially for someone like me who can now geek out and say, that's near where I live. Hee hee.
Driving by the library, we're like, ooh, vampires.
Side note over. One thing I do want to talk about Coldtown, though, is when they do go in, just how dilapidated it is. And that was probably one of the parts of the stories that really kind of threw me off. Because it's supposed to, I get it's supposed to be this contrast of what's seen on TV versus the reality. But all I could think of is, how is this sustainable long term? How are these people going to, the humans that are feeding the vampires going to get food? How are they going to keep power and heat in the winter and all that stuff? The place is basically on its last leg already, and it's only been a couple of years tops that this Coldtown has been there. How long before the whole program falls apart, and now this quarantine that the government has set up, when does that just not work anymore? Also, I thought it was kind of interesting the parallels with our latest pandemic, COVID, and the quarantines, and how those were so unsuccessful, and how the cold towns across the United States were also so unsuccessful.
Yeah, and this came out 10 years before COVID was a thing, so very prophetic in a way, because there are still vampires that escape from these cold towns and go on killing sprees and spread the virus in a way. So there are a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, but back to Gabriel.
Yeah.
So he knows the Thorn, and we're finding out that he really wants to kill the head vampire in the Springfield Coldtown. And why does he want to kill him? Because that bastard turned him into the spider, betrayed him. We also find out that guy that had been spreading the virus looked like Gabriel, it was kind of a mind fuck. Typical vampire games where game within a game within a game, and everyone's trying to sort of trick each other. It was just kind of peeling back all the layers of the onion to say, what is the real motives?
Yeah, this head vampire, Lucian, he's... when we meet him, he's very clearly detached from humanity. He's this huge reality show star. He lives in a mansion in the middle of this ghetto of Coldtown. People are setting themselves on fire in the streets, and he's making it look like it's the biggest party in the world, that everyone's having a great time there. However, he's just doing this all as a entertaining game for himself. He likes to mess with people. He's the one who turned Gabrielle, and he's forced Gabrielle to do just horrible things throughout time. And there's a lot of bad blood between them.
Yeah, we find out Gabrielle was Russian. Was he a prince?
Yeah, he was royalty of some sort.
Yeah, he was royalty of some sort during the time that the royal family was in its heyday in Russia. And we learn some interesting Russian tales, which, at least in this neck of the woods, we don't really hear very often. One story that I recognize from another podcast that I listen to really got me geeking out. I'll read it real quick here.
For those of you listening, my book has no sticky notes sticking out of it, and it looks like Joe has one coming out of just about every page.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, but so good.
We'll see who finds their reading selections first.
So this is towards the end of the book, chapter 33, where Tana and Jameson are talking with each other. Jameson is a boy she meets in Coldtown that kind of saves her butt a bunch of times as she's wandering around aimlessly.
Honestly, real quick aside about Jameson, he's essentially an exposition character. He's a person that Tana meets who tells her all about how Coldtown really is.
Yeah, so, this is Gabrielle. This is them waiting for night so that Tana can save Valentina, Jameson's love interest. So, Gabrielle is telling the story. Quote, "Then let me tell you a story while we wait for dusk to fall. When I was a boy, there was a woman who looked after my brother and me. She told us tales of firebirds and witches, about the warrior princess called Marya Moravena, whom Prince Ivan married. Ivan was all alone since he'd given his blessing for his sister to marry a falcon, his second sister to marry an eagle, and the third to marry a raven." "They married birds?" Tana echoed, not really so much for the answer as to show she was listening, and to make him smile. "Birds, who were sometimes men," Gabriel told her. "When Ivan saw Marya Moravana's fierceness in battle and her beauty, he fell instantly in love. They were married soon after. But warrior princesses are very busy, so soon Marya Moravana had to invade somewhere or battle somebody and left Ivan in charge of her kingdom. He had piles of gold and very good caviar and everything anyone could want, except for one thing. She implored him never to go into a single chamber under the palace." Tana thought of her own feet on the dusty steps leading down to her basement and to her mother waiting in the dark. "He did, though, didn't he?" Leaning in, she rested her head against his chest, closing her eyes. "He couldn't resist." Gabriel's accent deepened as he spoke. "And there, chained 12 strong chains, was Koshi the Deathless. And Koshi said, 'Please, I am so thirsty. Pity me and give me some water. I have been locked away here for 10 years, suffering torments you cannot imagine. My throat is so dry.'" "Is this a real story?" Tana interrupted, thinking of Gabriel's own decade of torment, of his own thirst. But the vampire only laughed. "A very famous one, I swear it. Anyway, Ivan is a kindly soul and brings Koshi water, but his thirst could not be quenched with a single bucketful, nor with a second bucketful. But when Ivan brought Koshi the third bucketful of water, Koshi was restored to his full strength and broke his chains." "The sin of mercy," Tana said. Gabriel looked a little embarrassed and a little pleased that she'd remembered. "Yes," he said softly, cool fingers resting against the skin of her bare shoulder, distracting her. "Ivan was merciful, and all the rest of the story is how he paid for it. Koshi kidnapped Marya Moravana and took her away to his own palace, leaving Ivan to chase after them. 3 times he was able to find Marya Moravana, and 3 times he was able to run away with her, but Koshi had a magical horse faster than the wind. The first time Koshi caught Ivan, out of the gratitude for the water he'd been given, he let Ivan go with a warning that if he was caught again, he'd be chopped into pieces. The second time Koshi caught Ivan, he let him go with the same fearsome warning. The third time Koshi caught Ivan, he made good on his threats. He chopped Ivan into 13 pieces with his sword, put the pieces into a tarred barrel, and threw the barrel into the sea. But the falcon, the eagle, and the raven who had married Ivan's sisters fished it out again. They took the pieces of Ivan's body and laid them on the ground like a puzzle. Once they'd put him back together, they sprinkled his body with water, and he woke up again as from a deep sleep." "So he was undead?" Tana asked. "Like a vampire?" "Something like that. He woke up smarter too, because this time he went to the witch Baba Yaga and won a horse as fine and as fast as Koshi's. With it, he ran away with Maria Moravana one final time. Koshi chased them in his magical horse, but this time, when he caught up, Ivan's sword struck Koshi with a mighty blow, smashing his skull. Then Ivan and Maria Moravana built a pyre and burned Koshi until he was ash. And then they lived happily, visiting each of Ivan's sisters and their bird husbands, all of whom declared that Ivan did the right thing to risk so much for a woman as beautiful and as fierce as Maria Moravana. So it's definitely a fun story, kind of shortened for the sake of this story, but it mirrors a lot of what's going on in this story, depending on who you're putting what character, as Tana or Gabriel or Lucian and Midnight. They could all be interchanged with these different characters at different times.
Yeah, that fable really sums up the entire story, even foreshadowing how it's going to end with the two heroes together. I'm glad you read from chapter 33 because I was going to read chapter 32, which describes just the absolute brutality of Gabriel's torture. So kind of going back to that fable you just read, where the hero in that story, Koshi, was tortured. This is just really bluntly put just a portion of what he endured and why he's so hell bent on revenge at this point. So chapter 32, it's very short. It's a lot shorter than what Joe just read, so don't have to get too comfortable. 8 years before, Gabriel came apart. First, the spider cut open his belly. The thing took out his guts and knotted them around the bars of his cage, ropey blue garlands. They gouged out his pomegranate seed eyes. They fed him foul blood and bile in his own skin. They cut him with knives, flogged him with razor-tipped whips, and drove rusty nails into the soles of his feet. When he healed, they did it again, until everything hurt all the time, forever. Pain so vast and terrible and huge, it blotted out thought. And so when he came back to himself, his memories were disjointed. He'd ripped out someone's throat, but he was no longer sure whose. There'd been blood everywhere. He'd slipped in it, clotted like soured milk. There was hair, too, a nest of it in a drain. And he remembered who had urged on his tormentors, the face of the creature who smiled down at him. I could tell you, Gabriel thought. I could give you someone else in my place, someone you like better, someone you'd hurt worse. But no, they'd taken every other piece of him. He would hold on to revenge. It would be his fairy story, his lullaby, sung softly by flayed lips, off-key and deranged. So that story you just told, that is his fable. That's how he wants this whole shindig to go down, and it's all driven by his mad quest for revenge.
Yeah, and the whole time we have this mysterious spider who is going to come and take Gabriel back, and Lucian is agitated but excited because he knows he's in a bit of trouble because he's the cause of a lot of these issues that the spider is having, and he wants to play the game and take the power and possibly even kill Spider and become the numero uno vampire.
Yeah, and this game winds up being pretty fun because there's double crossing, triple crossing. Every plan that's laid out in the beginning, Gabriel wants to kill Lucian, and then Lucian, he sacrifices his girlfriend to stave off Gabriel's blood rage, and they convinces them to team up so they can take down the spider together because the spider wants them both dead. So my enemy is my friend, and there's this whole duplicitous thing going on until it blows up finally.
Yeah, and meanwhile Tana keeps going in and screwing everyone's plans up, just doing her own thing, not realizing that.
Yeah, 'cause she only hears the outside of what's going on, so she's trying to prevent those two working together and also save her own skin. And meanwhile, she finds out her sister's coming to the Coldtown because she wants to be a part of the vampire culture, and she's trying to get out of there as fast as possible to head her off. Yeah.
And big reveal, turns out that Gabriel is the spider because he killed the spider in his prison break.
Yeah, and he inherited all of his powers and abilities.
Yep.
So Gabriel gets his revenge in the end.
And then on top of it, at the very end, Tana and Gabriel have their romantic last chapter where Tana is finally going cold because she had been bitten for sure by Midnight, and she's locked herself in a basement in Coldtown, chained to basically a wall, and is going to film it live to the world so that they can see what going cold and what vampirism really is instead of the glamour of it. But Gabriel goes down and says, I'm going to watch and hang out with you and take care of you since pain kind of gets me off.
Yeah, in a way, he manages to hold on to his humanity. The whole final chapter really is all about returning to human life, because Tana's sister Pearl comes to the Coldtown, and that helps Tana realize that she's been kind of doing this will they won't they. Does she want to actually become a vampire or not? She realizes with Pearl there that her family is important to her, and that if she becomes a vampire, she will never see them again. So that's why she decides to lock herself in a basement and endure the 88 days of being cold. But yeah, that last chapter, the quote at the beginning is different from the rest, because every other quote before that, it's romanticizing death in some way. But this last quote from W. Somerset Maugham says, "Death is a very dull, very dreary affair, and my advice to you is to have nothing whatever to do with it." So that whole, like, all the characters in the story at that point, after the revenge has been had and the truth has been exposed to them about vampires, they want to return to a normal life. And even Gabriel, by locking himself in with Tana, is showing that he's seeing the beauty of mortality, and he wants to help Tana with that. So it's very touching in the end. It's also, there's a great question that's asked in it about whether vampirism and that violence and damage that can be caused by it, is that something that is just unique to being a vampire, or is that something that was within us the entire time, waiting to come up to the surface?
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to discuss character-wise or plot-wise that really spoke out to you?
I think we hit the characters pretty hard already. Yeah, we touched on some of the themes in the story. Obviously, anytime there's a vampire story, we're talking about something to do with human sexuality. Just kind of summarizing my final thoughts on the book, though.
Before we get
Yeah,
that, I
sorry,
guess
I'm a little scatterbrained. We'll cut that.
Let's go a bit deeper with the whole vampire motif and sexuality. I mean, starting from Dracula, it was the foreigner stealing the British women away from their husbands, and the multiple wives, and possible bisexual type stuff. And most good vampire novels up that ante as society has evolved into a much looser feeling towards sexuality. We're at the point now where there's very little that can shock the average person. I mean, there's enough people that would be shocked by the story and the sexuality, but I think most people that are going to read it are going to be like, some of the stuff that Tana's doing, like, what's the big deal? Yeah, I guess the question is, why is Tana and Aiden the kind of people that the vampires would want to turn, versus someone else that's just begging to get to Coldtown and becoming a receptacle for food for these vampires?
So Tana and Aiden, as we said before, they're young adults.
But so are a lot of these other people.
So, well, that's the first thing, is that they're young. The ideas of immortality, avoiding aging, is very appealing. When I was that age, that was so, like, I couldn't imagine being in my 30s, much less an old man. So there is that appeal from that aspect. And going back to sexuality, like, vampires they're so slutty, they're so sexual. Like, even like the way they claim their victims. There's biting, there's sucking, there's pulling them in close. It's very intimate. If a vampire does it right, like, the person their victim wants to be bitten.
Well, I think with Tana and Aiden, they're always willing to up the ante. Mm-hmm. They're willing to go one step further, but it's not for a need of wanting something more. It's just trying to outdo each other. Where most of these people that want to become vampires are in a more submissive role. They want that power, they want that bloodlust, but they're debasing themselves instead of playing the game. They're groveling instead of saying, you want me to grovel? Okay, well, I'm going to grovel so hard that it's going to embarrass you.
Yeah, and Tana also has that added layer of being a vampire will give her a connection with her mother as well, because she constantly has those dreams that her and her mother are together again and they're vampires and everything is great. So that is why she, like, even though when she's bitten, she doesn't know whether she wants to endure the cold or become a vampire.
Yeah, it's not something that she necessarily wants, but she's willing to, like I said, do the one up to challenge those who say, "Are you really good enough?" And she'll say, "Of course I'm good enough. It's if I'm not going to do it, it's because I don't want it, not because of you told me I have to have it." So as a novel, this is kind of a mixture of romance, horror, and teen drama. How do they compare throughout the novel, and is was any overdone, underdone? How would you put it, that way?
I mean, romance is always overdone.
I thought it was a pretty light touch until the end, and it had a nice, good, slow burn to build up to it. It wasn't just hot and heavy.
Yeah, I always feel like with these like horror romances, there's always like times when the romance like seeps into a horror scene and it's kind of just makes it awkward. Like when I don't know, like Gabrielle's finally getting his revenge and Tana's sitting there. Like it's supposed to be kind of a scary scene where we see him in his full power, and she's sort of like, "Wow, he's so hot right now."
Yeah, I think a lot of times in the handful of these kind of books that are romance horror, it gets kind of rapey or just very icky, very fast, very questionable, uncomfortable for consent. Where I don't think this one ever really crossed that line. I mean, there was definitely the hints of of rape and of
Well,
you
there's
know
always that with the ancient vampire being attracted to the teenage girl scenario. Like even in like Twilight, like Edward's 200 years old and he's
yeah
attracted to 17-year-old Bella. We got that kind of similar situation here with Gabrielle's from 19th century Russia, and he's attracted to this this young lady.
and I think part of that too though is the vampires don't realize how old they are. I think they're still living in the 20-year-old body. They think they're 20 years old. I mean, it's kind of like
Yeah.
people,
Age is almost meaningless to you
yeah.
when you're never gonna die.
I mean, I walk around thinking I'm the same 20-year-old I was, and I look in a mirror and it's like the biggest punch in the gut every morning, and it's like, yep, I guess I'm old now. But if it was,
I get the same feeling when I look at you.
if I'm not looking in a mirror, I can forget just how old I am. But at this, at the same time, I see a 20-year-old and I'm kind of weirded out because I've matured too. I don't think a lot of the vampires ever matured. So I think that whole age difference is more of a outsider human perspective than a vampire perspective.
And vampires might seem wise and mystical, though they've had a completely different set of experiences that humans will never have. So their actual like shared what they have in common ideas are, yeah, they're going to be similar. Like vampires will have young ideas because they don't know what it means to be a grown human.
Yeah, but back to the question. I guess when I looked at it, it has its horror elements, monsters and everything, but it was never really horror. It was more of an action thriller. There was never anything that would stop and give me nightmares or really question.
Yeah, it borrows heavily from mystery and, like you said, action thriller. There's the whole mystery of who is Gabrielle and what does he really truly want.
Yeah.
And that's peeled back, and there's even like a whole, like after we learn that he's a spider, there's like the whole reveal of the role he played in the massacre in the beginning of the book and what he was really doing throughout the course of the story, either when he was on the page or if his character was elsewhere.
Yeah. So what do you think Holly Black is trying to say in this story? What's her message that she's trying to push?
I think there's two messages. I think one message is the importance of family, because that it keeps coming back to that family unit, and whether it's her relationship with her sister, her dad, or her mom, that has shaped who she is more than anything else. And then there's also don't trust what you see on TV, because make a Fight Club reference. There's like a cup of coffee in every scene in Fight Club. there's a camera in almost every scene in Coldest Girl and Coldtown. Someone's live streaming something or another. And it's either getting heavily edited, it's getting sexified, it's getting romanticized. But like you said, when they get to the Coldtown and it's a total dump of, it's a horror ghetto, it's a nightmare scenario. That's the real reality that you don't see. So it's a pretty clear message, like Holly Black is saying, like get off the internet.
Yeah, I kind of got, she's asking, what is a vampire? Why are we drawn to them? The answer we kind of talked about earlier. She's also examining the self-destructive behaviors that teens tend to have.
Yeah, it goes back to that question: are those things that vampires possess, that savage and raw and evil things that they're capable of doing, is that something that's unique to vampires, something within us? And I think she's implying that this is within us.
Yeah, it's
like
within us, and
humans are capable of horrible things,
especially kids. And a lot of these kids are willing to throw their lives away for the chance of glory. So do you think this story was good as a YA, or could she have made it more of an adult novel with more graphic scenes and that kind of stuff?
Generally, in my experience as a high school librarian, the only difference between YA and adult fiction is the age of the main character. Generally, YA the characters are between the ages of 16 and 19, and they'll be older if it's an adult book. That's just for appeal. Honestly, there are so many books out there for adults that we'll read just like YA. There might be more detail, there might be more graphic descriptions, but honestly, like there's a lot of graphic detail, like that chapter I read where Gabrielle's getting tortured. That's something you would read in an adult book as well.
And the last question I got is, and you probably won't be able to answer this, as you said, you don't really remember her other books that you have read, but how is this book similar to her other stories? And from my recollection, having read a lot of her stories, Holly Black does a lot of dark themes. She's very good at them. Her modern fairy tale trilogy, it's about teenagers essentially taking drugs, like heroin, but calling it fairy dust instead, where they're
very thinly veiled metaphors.
Yeah, but it's a bunch of teenage drug addicts getting hooked on this powder that they get off of the fairy folk, who just kind of naturally make it, and these people getting drawn in. Her latest series, it's about humans stuck in fairy tale world with elf-like creatures who are just going around torturing everybody, and them trying to just survive and become the worst of the Red Hatters and what have you to make it, and how this one girl basically takes over the whole realm by outfoxing the foxes, essentially. So this follows along similar lines, where for Tana to survive, she has to be more vampiric than the vampires and outwit them, outplay them at their own game, and just to the point where even they're shocked at her violence and willingness to do whatever it takes.
Yeah, I haven't read much Holly Black. What I have read of her that I remember is that she has a lot of characters, and this is very common in YA, that in some way, shape, or form will have a coming of age moment where they realize what they're capable of and who they want to be as people in the real world. This book is very consistent with that.
Okay. What are your final thoughts?
Well, contrary to what you might think of me, I actually wrote this down. So,
what?
So I quote myself here, this is a well-written teen fiction that plays tribute to the vampire stories that came before it. It rises in its writing and its character study above a lot of other vampire schlock that came out in that post-Twilight era. It includes Twilight itself. Those books are garbage. Anyway, the prose of this book, it's a very character-driven story, which is fun with a vampire kind of background, because there's less action and a lot more like, why do I care about these people? and explains that very well. Relationships are all fleshed out. The main characters all have a part to play. There's lots of twists and turns, unexpected happenings. Tana's fate gets left ambiguous at the end, which I find really cool. Like, is she going to make it the whole time or not?
Yeah, I always enjoy those kind of open-ended things where you just don't know what's going to happen or everything. You don't need everything spelled out. You can kind of come up with your own conclusions.
Yeah, and it carries with it that just sense of hope that her story, whether she recovers or not, is going to change how people view vampires. So there were some things that I kind of bugged me about it. Holding it back. Number one, the opening line. Do better. And it does. It always happens with books that are 400 pages. There's going to be parts where it might drag a little bit. And the part when they first got to Coldtown, it dragged a little bit. They started introducing they introduced 10 characters, rapid fire.
Yeah, halfway through the book.
Yeah, halfway through the book, and that's 3 or 4 chapters of the book, especially the way it's spaced out with a lot of backstory. Like, these characters are there, and then 2 chapters later, you find out they were only there so that someone was there to get killed, and because a lot of those characters end up dying really fast. And it was just kind of jarring, and it was almost like a dividing space between the road trip in the beginning and the kind of espionage book at the end. It was awkward, but I gave the book 4 stars. It's very, very well done. I enjoyed it.
Okay, my final thoughts, and I'll quote myself. I'll be a bit rambly, not probably more than you just were, but
yeah, that was me writing it down.
Okay, quote. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It succeeds in keeping me captivated, even after multiple reads. The book can feel real at times. It's the characters feel like they could exist. Yeah, obviously vampires don't exist, but you could totally see a Tana or an Aiden or a Jameson.
Those kinds of relationships do exist.
Yeah, you could, just those personalities exist. It's a psychological thrill ride where Tana is trying to save everyone and realizing sometimes you just can't save everyone. Kind of like you said, Alex, coming of age story. Holly Black has a clear understanding of psychology and philosophy. Throughout the text, she's constantly referencing famous psychologists or philosophical ideas. The fascination of death and eternal youth in the human mind is extremely well thought out and given to the reader in a way so that they can create their own conclusions. Even at the end, the reader is left with the uncertainty of if Tana will be able to become human again. And that's just something I love, where the author doesn't have to explain every little thing to you. Doesn't have to write 20 books to cover every little minute detail of every character. Leave the mystery.
Yeah, Wheel of Time.
I enjoy the use of the other characters that come in. I know you kind of thought they were just filler, but Valentina and Jameson I thought were definitely strong characters when they did come in, and they were well orchestrated there.
Yeah, I thought Valentine more so than Jameson. Like I said, Jameson was sort of like there to explain things.
Well, I mean, but you need it. Tana needed that. I mean, she's in an unfamiliar area, and
yeah, he was useful for that.
So these characters were well fleshed out, and they were just treated as normal people instead of I guess like Valentina. If you find out is a trans individual, but that's not the driving personality of her, which I thought a lot of modern literature people tend to miss the mark, where all of a sudden that's their identity, they're trans, and this was not who she was. She was just a strong individual that wanted to date Jameson, but thought he had a vampire girlfriend who turned out to be his mom. So I thought this book was nearly perfect. I mean, there's like every book, there's always some problems, but I definitely gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So, my kind of thesis question in this is, why does this book belong with all the other famous and lasting works of the vampire genre? We both kind of compared it to Interview and Dracula and stuff like Buffy. Why does it belong there? Why doesn't it, you think? Books that are also up there, like you said, are Twilight, which shouldn't be there. We both agree this is definitely not a Twilight type of book.
Well, books like Dracula and Interview with a Vampire, they use the vampire motif to hold up a mirror to humanity. They use those undercurrents of lust and desire and power to examine humanity's darker nature, and that's why Dracula was so outrageous when it first came out, because it pushed the envelope on what you would read in print back in the 1890s, or whenever it came out. An interview was the same way. Like, what does it mean to live forever? And like Louis in that book he gets that immortality and he's just miserable. You feel the same way with Lestat, even though he hides it better. In this book, you see vampires losing their will to live and setting themselves on fire in the street, and you see other vampires who've become detached from humanity and are treat humans like they're play toys. And in all these books, they suggest that we, as a people, are capable of horrible things in our quest for power and greater. I wouldn't say greater, but different kinds of lifestyles that you can live. So yeah, I don't know. Twilight doesn't really do that. It's teen romance. It's almost straight teen romance with, like, halfway through they realize, oh, there needs to be some action in here too, so they just throw random vampires who are gonna cause a mess in the whole thing. So yeah, this book is it's very good. I would put it with Interview with a Vampire as far as quality goes. It's not as morose or depressing, but it certainly has its moments.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with a lot of what you said. We're doing a deep dive in psychopathic and sociopathic people, and questioning, are vampires and people really that different in that sociopathic way. I think this is a kind of a good update. Like, you have Dracula, which over 100 years old now. It's kind of dated. Hard for a modern audience to read. And I think Anne Rice's books are kind of heading in that direction also, even though they're a lot newer. I mean, they're still close to 50 years old.
Yeah, I think the first book came out in the 70s.
Yeah, so talking 50 years old now almost. So this is.
Anne Rice recently passed away, didn't she?
Did she?
I think so.
Oh, that's terrible. How do we miss that? Anyways, this book kind of mixes Interview with a Vampire with, like, the Buffy TV show, where it's a little bit more action, a little bit more geared towards the modern audience, but without going into just full romance mode like Twilight and just kind of wimpifying vampires into this idealistic little monster thing that's not really a monster, just kind of creepy pedophiles. Yeah, but it has a lot of those same aspects through the storytelling that Interview does and Dracula does, of fleshing out and answering real questions about the human psychology. So, that is The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black.
And in this conversation, we can all agree that none of these books, Dracula, Interview, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Coldest Girl in Coldtown, none of them hold a candle to Blade.
Agreed.
But yeah, that has been Coldest Girl in Coldtown, Holly Black.
So Alex, you want to tell us what we're going to be reading for next month?
Yes, I would. Ooh. Or should it be a mystery? Alright, I'm going to make them wait for 5 seconds. Our next book is going to be And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Quick, I'll do 2 seconds on that. Agatha Christie, one of the top 2 best-selling authors of all time, wrote mystery novels, created Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. And Then There Were None is the best-selling mystery novel of all time, and it is absolute banger of a book. So give that a read, and we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah. So looking forward to that. So like and subscribe, all that jazz. Leave comments. If you want to email us, we have an email. It is.
And we like to wake up in the morning and like drink coffee together, and we'll read our emails, and we'll giggle.
Yep. Alex is good at giggling like a little girl.
We have a weighted blanket we sit under.
So our email is kendallbookworms@gmail.com. That is KendallBookworms
Let us know what you think.
Yep.
As long as you're not mean to us, please.
Please be nice. We're fragile.
Yeah, you heard that, Joe's fragile. Well, until next time, this has been Bookworms.
Out.